So, like, what is the JAMStack? Some of you may be asking. Some of you know. Well, it's an acronym for starters. The J is for JavaScript, the A is for APIs, and the M is for Markup. And the way in which you can use these technologies, you can serve static content over a CDN and leave a lot of your business logic, heavy thinking behind a serverless function living on someone's cloud. Kind of combining all of these technologies, not a specific technology, but technology concepts, you can come up with something like the JAMStack. That's why we're all here tonight. And go ahead and download this Peacock and Quill cross-platform application on your iOS, Android, computer, whatever devices. This is going to be a piece of Jonah's presentation. And so I'll let you do that. We've got some other things to talk about. Bathrooms, if you didn't hear me before, over there, flanking the kitchen. We've got some awesome sponsors, one of which is Frontier Airlines. They bought us this pizza and salad. Code Talent, this beautiful space we're in, offers us this space once a month, that beer cooler once a month. If you're looking for a job, they're a staffing agency. They do really good work. We can talk about that more later. What else? We have a code of conduct. It's posted on our meetup page. It's on our website. We've never had a problem in the past. I think I know most of you well enough that we're not going to have any problems, but if you want to check it out, it's out there. We're on Twitter at JAMStackDenver. I'm always tweeting awesome content, so please follow. So if you're looking for a speaking opportunity, this is a great place to do it. You've met some of your neighbors right now, but this is a super inclusive group. Everyone here is about building a good community, so there's no reason to ever feel intimidated or scared about giving a talk. So if you want to give a talk that's about like really anything technology related, we'll spin it into the JAMStack. If your company wants to sponsor and buy, a couple $100 of pizza every couple months, yes. So we're your company can probably spare the money that it takes to sponsor this. And if you want to help out organize the thing, just talk to one of the people I mentioned at the beginning of this, and we'd love to get you involved. So we talked about the JAMStack. The J is for JavaScript. Tonight we're going to be talking about Flutter and Dart, which is an SDK from Google that Jonah's going to tell us a lot more about. And then Swift, the famed programming language for Apple devices. Those aren't JavaScript, so we're going to figure out how these technologies fit into the JAMStack. And first up, we have Jonah Walker. So let's give it a round of applause. So, me and Jonah have done this Go Code Colorado competition for a couple years. That's where I first met him. Actually, through Dion, his partner, met Jonah, and we were talking about GraphQL. I had a beer and a half, so I was in the Goldilocks zone of networking. So I was just firing on all cylinders, talking about GraphQL. I come to find out that Jonah would be my future software development manager. So he helped launch my career into software development. We did Go Code again, and should have won both years, but definitely that second year. He's got a couple awesome dogs. Ask him or Dion about it. He loves coding in Flutter. That's his day in, day out right now. And both these people presenting tonight have been extremely critical to my development as a software developer in my professional career. So I'm super excited. We'll talk more about the other one here in about 30 or 40 minutes, but let's give Jonah Walker one more round of applause, and we'll get started.
No. Yeah, okay. So let's move this. Let's see. That's still good? Everyone good? Cool. So first of all, yes, please do, if you haven't already, go to the Apple and Android stores and download Peacock and Quill. I did notice that it might be hard to find on Android if you don't put it all as one word. So if you're having trouble finding that, go ahead. So Peacock and Quill is an app that I developed actually over the last month. And it's what I'm using currently to present to you all, and also what you're going to be interacting with throughout the application. So I gave a talk yesterday about Flutter at the Flutter meetup group, and that was much more technical details about Flutter for that. And essentially this is what I presented there. Today's talk, completely different. There's like two slides that are the same. So Peacock and Quill is a cross-platform application used to present information using the classic PowerPoint style while allowing the audience to participate. So some of the things you can do with this app is on certain images like the one that's here. Actually, I think this presentation has very little ability for this, but you can tap on it and then zoom in and zoom out. Also, you can, on any piece of text, what? I'll get to that. So, but yes, I guess I'll go ahead and do it. So in the top left here, you're going to be able to see the code. It is FEB005 for today's date, February 5th. FEB005. So log in on the latest devices, apparently with Apple if you're doing a third-party login. You also have to support Apple login now. So I found that out when I submitted it to the store, and then had to code that in like 4 hours. So that was great. The second thing you can do on any text that's on here, you can hold down and actually like long press on it and mark it with a question. So right now it should say, thanks for joining, wait for the presentation to begin. So now you should be seeing on your screen what you're seeing up here. Everyone good? After you sign in anyway. All right. So the things that I have not, inherent features. Instead of holding your phone up and taking pictures of the screen, all you have to do is take a screenshot with your phone. Same content. It's on your device now. Also, if you want custom font size, any of the Apple or Android devices will allow you to increase or decrease the size of your font, so you can do that as well. And also, if an image is too small and you want to see it a little bit larger and you don't have the zoom in capability, because I ended up pulling it from the web as a network image or a GIF, just turn your phone sideways. You're going to have more real estate that way. All right, so let's get started. I am Jonah Walker. On the net, I go by supposedly Sam. So you'll find me at GitHub under supposedly Sam, and my LinkedIn, I decided not to alias that, Jonah Walker Dev. My background is a CS degree from East Tennessee State University. I started out as a front-end developer for about 2 or 3 years, then became a full-stack developer in C#, MVC mostly. And then after that, I ended up finding this cross-platform development tool created by Google, and I've been working in it since it was in beta since 2018. So this is a very new language. It was stable release, I think, of December of that year. So with that in mind, today we're going to talk about how Flutter actually fits into the JAMStack. So I will not be showing you any JavaScript today. I will not be showing you any HTML, and I will not be showing you any CSS, but yet we will have a website. So the JAMStack is an acronym used to represent the website development technologies used to build a website. JavaScript, any language, framework, or tool that ultimately ends up using JavaScript to render a website. APIs, your non-presentation website logic, so presentation logic's fine, but any of your domain logic for your app or your website in general should be hosted using an API. And then markup, normally HTML, but can be any syntax used to create the DOM elements that your users and JavaScript interact with on the web. So how does Flutter fit in? Well, for the J, Flutter is a UI toolkit that uses Dart on the back end. So Dart is also an open sourced language by Google. And Flutter is currently in beta for website development, so there's still a ways to go on it. But Dart has been compiling Dart to JavaScript using their Dart to JS compiler since at least 2013, when they released a blog detailing Dart code compiled to JavaScript with Dart to JS compiler now runs faster than handwritten JavaScript on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine for the Delta Blue benchmark. So API. This is actually not related to Flutter at all. So the API part of JAMStack is an implementation detail of your team and your self if you are a one-person team. And basically what it is how you define your logic. So whether you write it inside of your code and then you ship that code with your application, or you take it and say, okay, we might actually want to reuse this for multiple apps, so let's go ahead and pull it out into an API, and then our applications are going to read from that. This is a really great way that people reuse like domain logic for their app and their website, because most of the time people have dedicated teams for Android, dedicated teams for iOS, and then a dedicated team for the web as well. And then markup. So the markup, Flutter uses a concept known as composition, where widgets are combined in a way that allows the developer to visually see their layout before running your code. So as you're looking at the code, you're going to be able to understand what the end result is going to be. You don't have to worry about it being in a different file for CSS or writing your HTML over here or the separation of concerns of all that kind of stuff. So my presentation goals, since Flutter is built on top of Dart, I want you all to come to the Dart side. So I'm going to make Flutter so appealing to the front-end community that you will want to learn Flutter rather than whatever the latest JavaScript framework is, because they change all the time. So how am I going to do that? By playing on your dislikes, of course. So some of the dislikes that I've heard from front-end developers is runtime errors, especially if you're not using TypeScript. Runtime errors and developer experience in general. Testing, because that can be extremely difficult on the front end. Styling, because who likes CSS? Browser compatibility, and then also skill reusability. That also is basically, am I going to be able to get a job in a couple of years if I continue working in the same technology that I am now? So, runtime errors and developer experience. Dart, oh, by the way, just for now, everyone on your phone, hold down, long press, and do a question. Because just for the heck of it, I want to be able to show off that feature because I spent a whole month building this app. Okay, what? Let me check. Let's see, anything? Nothing on the devices? One sec. So this backend is actually in Firebase, by the way, for the Peacock and Quill. So I'm just going to go ahead and log into, or responsive. Just going to log into Peacock and Quill real quick and see if I can switch that manually, because apparently I broke that earlier today. As any good demo goes, right? So pull up the database. Got a lot of users in here. Presentations, F005 on slide 7 is active true. Uh-oh. So you all should be seeing it. Oh well, as is life. Okay, so we'll just grab back to this. All right, so runtime errors and developer experience. So Dart and Flutter make a really great couple. Dart uses flexible type system with a rich static analysis, allowing you, the developer, to develop with confidence. Specify what type you expect, similar to TypeScript, and your IDE helps to ensure your success. Basically, I like to say that Dart is kind of a mixture of like C# and JavaScript. So it's really easy for anyone to jump in and learn it. I was actually up and running in it in like 3 hours, and I had no experience in it at all beforehand. So, testing. Instead of actually having to use any kind of other framework or things of that nature, testing is built right in with Flutter. So the whole goal of the Flutter ecosystem is essentially to write it once and run it everywhere. This is like the ultimate goal of a developer, is to be able to have the one single code base and it runs on every application. So that's essentially what they're working towards. So what type of testing that you can do, unit test. So this is to test your logic without running presentation code at all. So you don't actually have to run a widget, which is what they call them in Flutter, in order to test the logic of your component. Just run the logic, make sure it gives you back what you actually want. Widgets, aka component testing in other frameworks. Test widgets directly without running the entire app. And then also integration. So test interactions between widgets to make sure that services and repositories as well, to make sure that they work together the way that you expect them. And you can also do this with the help of Mockito, which a lot of front-end developers are already going to be familiar with. Styling. I love this GIF. Styling. So I haven't met many people who love writing CSS. Some people are like, well, I'm pretty good at it. Like, I've spent 10 years, and they're proud of that. And that's a good thing. You should be proud of it. But coming into the industry or even being in it for a few years, if you're not in it like every single day doing styling, it's rough. And then also like React developers having to write JSX instead of CSS, a little bit different. What about Flexbox and CSS Grid? Do you guys know that? Who knows? Widgets. So with Flutter, instead of actually writing CSS, you use widgets. So there's an entire theme widget which you're going to be able to tweak to your heart's content and basically be able to update your entire application with one section of code. But if you need to override it or you just have a one-off thing that you're trying to do, you can also go directly to it. So some of the widgets that you can use, padding widgets, and then inside of like usually a container, which is essentially the div form of Flutter, you can do coloring, images, border radius, elevation, animations like icons, all kinds of other stuff. So skill reusability. These are just some of the JS frameworks that I pulled off of the web. So Angular, AngularJS, React, Vue, Ember, Mithril, Polymer, Aurelia, I think, Backbone, Next, Mercury, Riot. At this point in time, I basically ask you what, oh, I guess, okay, I missed a slide. So browsing compatibility. I tested this with the presentation app that I'm using earlier, because right now, since it's in beta, there's not really any statistics or data on what it's actually supporting right now. But it was very successful on Edge, which I was surprised, Firefox, Safari, and Chrome. And it didn't work at all on Internet Explorer, which is to be expected. So Markup. So we're to the M in the JAMStack. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier with styling. In Flutter, everything's a widget. So they have widgets that you use for layout. They have widgets that you can use for styling. They have widgets for just about everything. So on the right-hand side here, you can actually see that it's scrolling through a list of widgets that I just did a video for earlier. And this is on their website. So Flutter has an amazing set of documentation, amazing set of tutorials that you can go through and get up and running extremely fast. But the great part about these is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you want a button, you don't have to go look at another site to figure out what the heck a button looks like, because you, as a user, don't actually pay attention to whether it has 2 or 3 pixels of drop shadow that's, you know, EF on a hex code. You don't need to know that as a developer unless you're doing design. So normally you can use any kind of button that's automatically given to you. You can use tab views. You can use all kinds of stuff that's already pre-built. They have hundreds of widgets that you can use. So I should ask you what you're going to learn next, but obviously. Now, I thought I could do some live coding, but instead I decided earlier, it was about 2:30 today, and I was planning for this meetup. And so I saw this design. I think you can see it well. This is a resume template that I just found on Google. And I decided to see if I could actually build this. So I created a brand new from scratch GitHub repository. I did Flutter create, which is how you use it in order to create a new setup. And the result of that is this GitHub here. So you can see code. This is open source, so anyone can get access to it. I'm supposedly Sam on GitHub. This is the Flutter resume repo. And I deployed it with Netlify. So if you look at this website, this is what I ended up getting. So I did this in about 2.5 hours. If we pull this down, we should be able to see this fairly responsive. I actually did put in some code that I decided the mobile side of it, so once you actually get pretty small in here, if you were to open this with a mobile device or something like that, or if you're doing what I'm doing here, I decided that at 1,000 pixels, I no longer wanted it to be showing. So I intentionally made it go white here, just so that anyone that's in here currently, if you wanted to use this Git repo later on and try your Flutter skills out, you can clone this. You can use the widgets that are already there and some of the stuff that we're going to be doing today, because I'm going to walk you through some Flutter code, which is what I used in order to build this exact site. So without further ado, let's get into the code. All right, so here is our code. Let me go ahead and make that a little bit bigger for you guys. Let's see. All right. So we're not going to need this bottom part. This is the layout that's very basic. Actually, a couple other folders got put in here, and I deleted those out. So the other folders that got put in here whenever you run Flutter create is the iOS and the Android folders. So Flutter, as you would have seen, I really hoped that app would work, but it did yesterday. If I were to run this exact same code, I could generate an Android and iOS app with no extra work. Like literally exact same code, doing nothing else, automatically have an Android and iOS app that we can deploy to the store. So that's a huge draw for using Flutter in general. Not only can you build a website, but you can also have a companion app for it. Now, the web folder you would think is like immediately the first place that you go, but with any cross-platform tool, usually there's one location that you do most of your coding, and then there's the specific folders that you go and do the very specific things in. So for instance, if you were setting up Firebase, you actually have to set up some kind of configuration for Android, configuration for iOS, and then configuration for the web. So you would go into the individual folders for that. Now with Flutter, the lib folder is your main folder, and then it gets kind of compiled out to all of those other ones. So main is the main.dart is the entry point for your application. So just to talk through this code just a little bit, if you're familiar with any kind of back-end languages, this is going to be very familiar to you. Also with JavaScript's ES6 syntax, this might be familiar to you as well. So here we have our main application, which gets kicked off, and it's just calling run app. That's something that's very Flutter specific. You shouldn't know that if you haven't seen Flutter before. Then what we're doing is creating this class here. So Flutter resume is a stateless widget. And like I said, in Flutter, everything is a widget. They have very helpful documentation, and if you want to, since it's open source, you can actually right-click and go to definition, and then you'd be actually inside of Flutter's code that they used, the Google team used, in order to build this entire application. So you can basically learn from Google developers and figure out how to make your code better, or just steal their stuff and make it your own, which is open source. So a material app is what you use in order to get access to basically the entire layout. Here's your theme data. The IDE is being very helpful, but when there's a widget that is this large, it might be easier just to go to the class. So these are all options of arguments that you can actually pass in, title being one of them. So if you were to look in here somewhere, you would see title. But title is going to be the title of this application, whether that's a web or mobile. I'm just going to call it app in general. So we can set our theme data. I've just set a couple of things here. You don't necessarily really need to set much other than the primary swatch, which is really good to set. When you load this application, you're going to go to the home view. So home is the very first page that you're going to hit. So in doing so, you're going to hit this home view class. I've created a presentation folder over here with views, and so views are essentially full screens. So it's going directly to the home view screen. Now earlier I showed you that when you start going down in size, you will see that it's at 1,000 pixels, it no longer works, right? Well, that's because I've switched it from 1,000 pixels as my breakpoint to show this small view, and otherwise if it's larger than 1,000, show this large view. So Layout Builder in Flutter is something that's built in with it, no extra packages or anything needed, and it allows you to get access to the constraints of your application. So this is kind of like how you, in JavaScript or in CSS, use media query in order to know what size your browser is at a certain point in time. This is how you get access to it here. You can also directly access media query, but this just makes it a little bit easier. So home view large, that's what we're looking at. So if we go to home view large, we will see, I'll make this a little bit bigger over here. We'll see that I passed in the max height and the max width that I got from the layout builder beforehand, and they are required arguments. Flutter essentially uses named parameters so that you can pass them in any way that you want. I can switch these and it doesn't matter. So like that's still going to be passed to it correctly. That's the benefit of using named arguments rather than using positional arguments. So going back to the large screen here, we have a little bit of math because in order to make it match what we were looking at, it looked like to me, and people can figure this out on their own, but to me it looked like they were doing it very much based on percentages. So I decided to also do it based on percentage because I don't want to have a site that's not responsive. So I created content height. I'm calling this top section up here content and the bottom section down here footer. Content height is going to be the max height times 75%, so it's only going to be 3/4 of the way down on the screen from the height's perspective. And then the height of the footer is going to be the other 1/4 of the screen. And then we've got the content width. So from the design, you can see that there's going to be a little bit of space on the edge, and you can see that that space is not as close to the edge as this one is. So we've got a 0.85 there and a 0.9 for our footer. So as we go down, so those are just variables. Final is a way of essentially like, it's very similar to const in JavaScript, the way that it works. Const in Flutter is a little bit different. It actually gets compiled into the code whenever it gets run. So here, this is the, and we're going to be doing a little bit of refactoring, right? So you can see as we scroll, like this starts to get a little bit large. So we're going to be doing some refactoring to make it a little bit easier. But if you start looking at this, you can kind of see how you would compose it, which is the compositional layout. So if you look at this page, you can see that it's kind of set up like this. Like if you're looking at this top content section versus the bottom footer section, you can see that this top section is laid out in a row. So you have 3 different columns, you would say, inside of this row going horizontally. And then down here, you also have another row of 3 different items going horizontally as well. So together, you could say, and like imagine this as basically being some kind of Excel document or something. So like you can say that you're laying it out in a column with 2 rows inside of that, where each row has 3 cells. So at a very basic level, that's kind of how this is laid out. So using composition with Flutter, you can basically write what you're already looking at. So we have a column here, and inside of that column, let's go ahead and see if we can make that smaller. So we have a single column, so that matches up with what we were thinking, right? And then inside of that, we pretty much have another row. So here's the row there. And then another row. So exactly what we were thinking so far. Now in Flutter, what I was talking about with the styling, the container is basically like a div. And then a lot of your color and your height and your width can be set immediately in line with what you're working on. So I know that this container needed to be the content's height and then needed to be the content's width. So this is essentially a wrapper around our content section that allows us to have the size that we're looking for. Then we've got our row, and in Flutter, a column or a container and things of that nature are usually only as large as the child contents that are inside of it. So we use this expanded in order to say, hey, take up as much room as you can. Now, since we have 3 expandeds total, that's going to give us equal spacing for our top section. And same for the bottom. So if you saw that down below, this row is going to basically have the same setup. So as we look into these a little bit more, you can see that now we're starting to get into the info section. So the very first one that we're looking at is the info. And you start to see that around the entire info section, so this entire white section here, there needs to be a little bit of padding. We don't necessarily want that right up against the image. So we have our padding here, which we wrap around our column, because our column is what we're going to use to put all of our data inside of here. So our column, we're doing just like you would in Flexbox. So we're saying that it's going to be space around. And then we're also setting the alignment. So we're saying cross-axis alignment, since the main axis of a column is on the y-axis going up and down. Cross-axis is going to be the other way around. So we're going to align that towards the center. So that's what the end property is there. And then we're going to create another column, and the reason being is that since we're doing space around, what that does is basically space out everything equally. But I wanted the name and the title here, which you'll notice they went from a web designer to a Flutter developer. But I wanted those to be a little bit closer. So I'm able to get fine-grained control over that by essentially wrapping them in another column. So that column has our text here and our text here for John Smith and Flutter developer. And then as we go down, we have a container, which all that is just this little bar here. A container that has a height and a width and a color. We've got a limited box. So here I actually found that as you start making it smaller, you'll notice that this lorem ipsum text is too large. And what would happen was the hire me button would no longer be there. And that's not what we want. We want people to hire us. So I decided to wrap this inside of a scrollable content so that no matter what size you're on, you're actually going to be able to scroll and see the content. So this limited box allows us to specify that I only ever want this center section here to be half the size of the content, so 50%. So we got our list view. That's what allows us to scroll. Shrink wrap is just a property that you pass to it that tells it, don't take up as much space as you can, take up as little space as you can. So it's actually the exact opposite. And then the lorem ipsum text in here, essentially doing a little bit of making the text look better for human readable eyes. So letter spacing and then height. Doing it a little bit end, walk through, and like you can literally see that as you're reading this code, it's lining up exactly with what you think. So here's one thing that's going to get a little messy, and this is what our first thing that we're going to refactor out. So I'm creating a button here, but Flutter doesn't have anything that looks exactly like this, especially with this outer border and everything. So I kind of had to create that as a custom button. So I made that by using a container, which has a border around it. Box decoration is essentially what you use in order to access the decoration properties, so style properties on a container. So I was able to give it a black border of 1 width, and then also set some padding inside of that. So you can see that instead of using the padding widget, some class, or well, it is a class, but some widgets such as padding or such as a container actually have an argument that you can pass to it called padding. Now, I have no idea what edge insets are, but that's exactly what you use in order to set basically like a pixel amount. So edge insets, this is a named constructor. So you have multiple of these. You have symmetric, you have all, so this is how you're essentially adding padding to the entire part of it, while symmetric will be adding it to either the horizontal left and right or vertical top and bottom. And then there's also like an only one. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do this. Then we're going to do a hire me. The other alternative, since this is a programming language and not just CSS or anything, I would have been able to just type to upper, and it would have uppercased whatever I typed in there. So that can be used as a safety check anyway. And then we've got our on tap. So anytime that someone taps on that, that's actually going to be allowing us to get access to this function and kick off whatever we want, hopefully to get hired. Now, this is kind of large, right? It's this little section here. So I would actually like to pull this out. So with our help of our VS Code here, we can see the syntax highlighting of the ending parentheses. So I'm going to use VS Code here in order to essentially do control dot, and it's command dot on a Mac. And I've got a lot of helpful tools. I could just remove it completely if I wanted to, or wrap it with another widget so you don't have to worry about trying to find where it closes and where it opens. You just say wrap with a widget, and then you're able to compose that new one around it. Padding is such a common thing to add to it. They've actually added a shortcut in here, also adding columns and rows and things of that as well. But what we're going to actually do is we're going to extract this out as a method. And we could do it as a widget, which means that it would actually go into its own class. Not automatically, it'll actually put its class at the bottom. But that's what we've done for our other components that you're going to see inside of here. So we're going to do a method. And when you do control dot and you go down to extract method, it allows you to give it a name. In Flutter, if you underscore something as the very first thing in the name, it makes it a private variable. So that's how they actually do it instead of having a designation or a keyword for it. So we're going to make this private and nothing else needs to see this. And it's only used by this class. And we're going to call it the Hire Me button. In doing that, automatically replace that with the Hire Me button there and moved Hire Me down below it. So the formatting's horrible, right? But Control S automatically formats and we're all good to go. So now we've got our Hire Me button out, and then the next section is this image. So you'll actually notice that we're doing a little bit of clipping here. As you go left and right, you'll see that the image stays in the center while it continues to show more or show less as you move left and right. So here is what we're doing. It's very simple. Inside of Flutter, we've actually pulled in this resume image from Unsplash. I have no idea who this guy is, but thank him so much for helping us with this demo. And so all we do is pull in an image asset, and you've got these that are also image network, which is how you load GIFs, which is all what we actually want to know. So load this in, tell it to fit it to the height, and then also make sure that it's going to be the height that we expect, which is our content height. Clip that so that Flutter understands that we actually are meaning to allow it to go outside the bounds. And then just make sure that it's in our expanded so that it's equal height or equal width to all the other things around it. So that one's extremely simple. Then we've got this section, which I've already created other widgets for. So the skill progress, all we're doing here is passing in the 0.8 or whatever it is for the progression, and also what the name is for our skill. And it will automatically multiply that percentage that we gave it by 100 to give us the actual percent, and use that other decimal point in order to get us to the progress bar. And all that is, we'll go into that, so I'll hit F12 to go to definition. Seeing this, it accepts a skill and a competency. And so going through, all it is a column because they need to be on top of one another. I've got some rich text, reason being is that we've got design, which is black, and then also this text beside it, which is actually a different color. So I chose the highlight color of pink, but you can choose anything else. So we've got our rich text, which has a couple of text spans inside of here. And here's the math that we're doing using string interpolation to take that variable and multiply it by 100 so that you actually get the output of 80 or 65 or whatever you're looking for. And then this linear progress indicator, anytime you hover over, you can see what package it's from. So you can see this is directly from Flutter. So we didn't have to do anything in order to get access to this. It came with it. I just set the background color to gray and set the value color to pink. This one actually does have the ability to animate in. So when you open up the page, it could have started from 0 and went up to the top. I just decided to tell it to just always be stopped. We don't need anything fancy right now. So going back to our, yeah.
You actually.
Okay.
This looks like, so this looks like it's complecting a lot of different things together in the same thing, if you will. There's a layout thing, there's styling, and then there's components on top of it. You know, could you sort of speak about like experience doing this sort of compared with CSS and, you know, like in terms of the market that exists today? You can find a lot of designers, you can find a lot of people who are familiar with CSS because it's just such a ubiquitous thing for doing styling and layout, right? And this just looks like you're putting all of that into code, like every single part of it. And it has its own definitions, its own properties, its own sort of understanding of as well. And so I'm just wondering, you know, in terms of understanding what this is doing, it feels like there's a huge barrier to entry in figuring how all this stuff works compared to all the resources that are available that exist roughly. So I was just curious as to what your take on that is.
Sure. I mean, so as a developer, anytime you start with something new, you're not going to know it, right? So whether you just started learning CSS or you just started learning Flutter, if you literally didn't know either of them and you started learning them at the same time, I believe the learning curve is about the same. So just because everyone currently knows CSS isn't necessarily a reason for why that's better. For this, being all in code is actually a benefit in my perspective because you don't have to understand the quirks of one thing over another, right? Like this isn't cascading, so you don't have to worry about it getting things from other like steps that you don't necessarily know where it came from, or pulling in a style sheet from another author or from another package and it overriding styles on yours. If you want a style for the entire application and not have to do it specific, like for instance in that button, if all of my buttons across the entire app needed to be the same thing, I wouldn't have changed it here. I would have actually done it in the theme, and the theme would have applied it to the entire application. So for me, it's very similar to how you would think of it with React. With like JSX, you're not writing CSS. You're writing JSX, which is JavaScript, which gets compiled into CSS. So this is already a thing in the computer industry of writing it in one language and it compiling it to others. The only reason why React kind of went with that style was to make it easier for you as a developer to come in and get to work immediately. Now, what the dev team for Flutter and for Dart has done is essentially create absolutely amazing tooling so that you're able to get up and running quickly as well, and also a ton of tutorials. So if you're worried about like learning this and all the intricacies, literally Google like one thing that you're trying to learn, and there will be 20 Stack Overflow posts, 5 Medium articles, and probably 3 or 4 YouTube videos on how to do it. So here, just to tell you, yes, there's a lot to this, but if you hit Control Dot inside of any of these like methods, they'll actually show you what you have available. Well, yeah, so it is an IDE, but it like definitely has a lot of support for you. Let's see. Trying to find one I haven't already exhausted all of the possibilities on so that it can show us. Container, definitely. All right, so here you can see that you've got alignment, you've got clip behavior, decoration, and all of that kind of stuff. If you're wondering, okay, well, maybe I want decoration, but how do I actually use that? Whenever you click decoration and you hover over that, it's going to tell you what it requires as the argument, so it's requiring decoration. So you're going to get used to this, but box decoration is essentially what you need to use for a container. So on that box decoration, you have the ability to pass in color, an image, a border radius, and all of these kinds of things. So this is just another class that you need to pass to it in order to get that to work. So in order to get a border radius, you need to pass in border radius geometry. Like it's basically telling you what to do without you going anywhere. So you don't really need to Google as long as you know how to use your IDE. Okay, so that's already built in. And then also I pulled in Font Awesome icons, and you can do that from a plethora of packages that are available for Flutter and Dart. And so you include those inside of your pubspec YAML. So this is basically like your configuration file that you're used to seeing in JavaScript, just written in a different language. So here we have our Firebase stuff that I pulled in because I was originally going to write all the text and stuff that you're seeing from your user. I was going to pull that in from Firebase. But I decided that would just overcomplicate it since all we're learning is Flutter right now and we don't really care about Firebase for this particular talk. So that's just in there. I do need to delete it. It's not really causing any harm because I'm not importing it into the code at any point in time. But I do have our Font Awesome Flutter here. So when we go back and we go down to the social icons, this is like, and again, like you mentioned components, but I'm creating those components just like you would in any other language. It's your organizational preference on whether you keep it all in one giant file or whether you break it out into tiny components or whether you it's up to you. So I created a social icon, which all it does is really create the gray background and have the logo that you pass into it. And then I also made it wrap so that as you go down, you can see that it wraps around rather than going off of the page. All right, so that's all I got to show you guys. Thank you, and then we'll get to questions.
All right, thank you so much, Jonah. I appreciate that JAMStack intro. Like, we should have you do the JAMStack intro for us because you explained it so well and kind of how Flutter fits in. To kind of follow up on that question, Flutter is certainly opinionated about the way in which you go about doing things. But since working with it from a beta stage. Can you talk a little bit about the community and the tools and the things that are out there for developers who maybe want to start exploring Flutter?
Yeah, so the community for Flutter is extremely strong. I mean, not only is there an ecosystem with multiple people who make videos weekly on like new things that are coming out, new packages that are being created, and all of that, but there's also a Discord channel that you can get in and ask a question and get your question answered in like 5 minutes. I mean, it's extremely fast. There's always someone in there to answer your questions, whether that's beginner, intermediate, advanced, talking about Firebase, talking about iOS, Android, on the web, desktop, like literally there's a channel for everything. So if you need to ask a question, go to the r/r/Flutter dev Discord channel, and you'll be able to find help there immediately. But yeah, other than that, I mean, they've really worked hard. Their documentation is the absolute best that I've ever seen. It's honestly, their Flutter documentation is better to get set up for Android development than going to the Android documentation. So like they've done a really great job. It's only getting better.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. Like we said, this is going to be live streamed across the globe. And so in order to ask questions, we're going to have you speak into the microphone. So if you're willing to bear with us while that happens. So is there any questions from the audience? I know there is. Gabe's got one. What's up, Gabe?
So I was wondering how this compares to other mobile frameworks such as React Native or Vue Native and those sort of things, or Swift.
Sure. So Flutter, it compiles down to native architecture. So if you're worried about performance or anything of that nature, you don't really have to. It compiles down to ARM architecture, which runs on both Android and iOS and can actually be embedded in devices and desktop and all kinds of stuff. So in order for it to like, or not in order, since it does compile down to like a static compilation, you have about 60 frames per second that it runs in whenever you're running your app on your iOS or Android device. And then, you know, kind of with the statement that I led with earlier, it's faster than writing the same equivalent code with like handwritten JavaScript.
Are there, oh, we got one all the way back here from Caitlin.
Hi, so to write Flutter, are there Dart files? Like they ended in the Dart description? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, so like I said, Flutter is a UI toolkit that's actually built on top of Dart, and Dart is the language that is running. So essentially when you're doing things like the to-upper and you're doing mapping and like all of that other stuff that you would normally do in JavaScript or things of that nature, you're using Dart for that. And then when you're actually doing things using UI components, that's going to be Flutter. So essentially on the back end, the Flutter team has written all of these UI pieces that are built out of Dart, but you get access to it through the Flutter library. And
Okay.
then like the toolkit in general is a lot larger than just the Flutter library and like the Dart code. So there's a whole thing of like being able to launch it on any emulator, being able to see your widget tree hierarchy, hot reload, which is absolutely amazing on devices. So Android and iOS, normally when you run it, it takes between 1 and 5 minutes in order to start up your application, and then can be about the same amount of time every single time that you make a change. And talk about time consuming. So what they've done is they use AOT, which is ahead of time compilation, and JIT, which is just in time compilation, depending on whether you're doing development or whether you're actually putting it to a production level application. And that allows it to essentially hot swap in the files that you changed. So you're able to keep your state of your application. So whether you like clicked a button 10 times and you have a number that says 10, and you're trying to keep track of that, but you also want to make a change to like something that's not state related, it'll automatically swap in that new change for you and keep the state of your application. So that if you're like 5 pages in and also in the middle of a form and you just want to like change some text or change a verification or something like that, you don't have to restart your entire app. It's just immediately coming back in. So like Dart are the extensions that you use, but you're using the Flutter library in order to get access to the UI components.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So you briefly touched on the fact that you, I think, got rid of like the iOS and Android directories when you started.
Yep.
Say you wanted to like handle like an iOS like status tab event, or you want to style like a status bar. Are you writing Dart files inside of those directories, or how's that handled?
So if you're trying to update the status bar,
Yeah.
so like if
say
you're
style
changing
or
it
something.
from a different color, or if
Yeah.
you're like changing the text or whatever,
Yeah.
you do have system level access to like the system.chrome or something like that in order to change that. But a lot of times whenever you're doing an app specifically, and also like all of these same exact components work for the web as well, it's just they change the way that they lay out. The app bar, which is contained inside of your scaffold, and the scaffold is basically like yeah, no, it's getting a little complex. Sorry about that. So the scaffold is basically the main part of your app. So you've got your material app, which gives you all your styles. And then when you get into the home view, you'll notice that the very first thing I did was create a scaffold. So on that, if you look, there's a bunch of properties. First property that you're going to see is an app bar. Whenever you add that app bar, and again, like it makes it pretty easy, app bar needs an app bar. So you type app bar as a class, and that's going to give you options to everything that you want to give it. Title is how you like basically tell it what to look for. And again, this is just kind of like a Flutter specific thing. It's gonna get taking a little bit of use to get the composition, but once you do, you're gonna love it. And so we're gonna put this as Flutter demo. And so we're gonna save that, and then just for the heck of it, this is actually a live URL. I'm just gonna go ahead and run git add dot git. Let's see what the problems are here. Oh. So I ran Flutter create dot. So what that did was pull back in those things that I told you that I deleted. So we do have an Android and an iOS application now, and actually we could be able to run it on an iOS and Android emulator. But since I've got it set to this 1000, we'd literally just see a white screen. But either way, so now we've got no problems. We do git add dot. We do git commit -m, add a message there. So we're going to say live coding. And then we're just going to go ahead and push that. So since this is set up with Netlify, I hooked it to my Git repo and then told it to look for a certain branch, which I didn't commit just now. So Flutter build web is what you actually use in order to compile the web directory. And once that compiles, then I'll be able to push it, and then we'll be able to see the update in about probably 15, 20 seconds. Like, it's extremely fast in order for it to go to a commit to actually seeing it on the web. But just being able to add the app bar here will automatically tell your system to update the status bar of your application. And if you need more fine-grained control over that, there's actually like 2 or 3 lines of code that you can add that tells exactly what to do, whether you're iOS or Android or whatever. So you can build a material app that will look the exact same on iOS and Android with the appropriate things for each device. So for instance, like whenever you pull down on an Android device, you get the little wave from the top. But if you pull down and there's no more content on an iOS device, you'll get the bounce, right? So it'll actually pull down and then pop back up. So all of that's handled for you automatically. But if you wanted to, there's a Cupertino package to where you can build an iOS app that's specific for iOS, and then also the regular material, which is what Android uses as material design. The status bar is all built in.
All right. That was awesome, Jonah.
Thank you.
Let's give him a round of applause.